Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It's Saturday, March 29th, 2025, and on Saturdays we tackle sports and humor. On the more serious side today, we're going to be looking at my sports hero. I want to first express my gratitude to my parents for something quite specific. I grew up in a household where we were basically encouraged to participate in sports as much as we could. In my case, that meant literally playing sports on a year-round basis. Baseball in the summer, football in the fall, and then basketball in the winter and spring, and then swimming year-round, actually, and then diving as well, competitive diving in the summers. But I think I actually enjoyed watching sports as much as I did playing sports, perhaps because I knew I would never ascend to the grandiose heights of the Olympics or professional sports. I could see what the greats were able to do, and I was always marveling at what the greatest athletes could do in the different sports growing up. So, for example, I remember quite well the 1972 Olympics. That really stood out as a pivotal experience. I remember watching many of the events as they expressly talked about them live via satellite from Munich, Germany on ABC. From Mark Spitz winning 7 gold medals, which was then the record at one Olympiad, to our fellow swimmer, Melissa Belote. We literally swam on the same competitive swim team. She won 3 gold medals in that Olympics. I remember Dave Waddle's amazing comeback from last to first in the 800 meters run. I remember the dazzling displays of Olga Korbut, the Russian gymnast. I remember the heartbreak after the U.S. men's basketball team won the gold medal twice, but then both times had that taken away from them due to, clock malfunction and other sorts of things. So they actually played the end of the game a third time, and on that third and final occasion, they lost the gold medal to the Soviet Union. So, of course, all of that then was juxtaposed against the backdrop of the horrific terrorist attack by the Black September that left the organization that left 11 Israeli athletes dead. And, of course, the incident shocked the entire global community. And even at just 10 years of age, I knew that that was not what sports should be about, and that really left an indelible imprint on my own memory and my own thinking about life and sports and in general. I always kind of viewed sports as a unifying endeavor for humankind, that we should come together and push each other to the limits of our abilities. Sure, I was hyper-competitive when I was younger, probably to a fault in some cases. And maybe because I knew I'd never reach the pinnacle or the podium at the highest levels. But as I got older, I definitely learned to appreciate the games and especially the sacrifices that people would make in order to achieve great things in their endeavors. I remember hearing on many occasions great athletes talk about basically, and I'm just summarizing here, how you never reach the pinnacle. You don't win the games in the spotlight before the crowds as such. Rather, the results are the byproduct of all those countless hours spent training without the lights, often alone in the early mornings or late in the evenings, with no fans in the stands and no one cheering. And in some point as a young adult, I finally realized the meaning and purpose of sports at a much deeper level. And that probably inspired me to start my own coaching career with youth sports back in 1981. And I also started to rethink who my real sports heroes were at that time. And certainly the list does include a wide range of people, some of whom are considered the GOATs, the greatest of all time in their disciplines, or the list has expanded tremendously, though, over the years to include a whole range of different athletes who more often than not were the underdogs or overcame incredible odds and obstacles to do something really special. And so that brings me to my own personal sporting hero. And I'm not alone in this. I'm sure there are many others who share this same hero, especially in Canada. And that would be Terry Fox. Terry Fox would be the one person whom I'd recommend among all others as emblematic of what I think about when I think of the concept of a sports hero. So who was Terry Fox? Well, again, many of you already know. He's certainly a national treasure here in Canada. But I really hadn't heard of him or thought much about him prior to coming to Canada myself in 1990. Thereupon, I almost immediately learned who Terry Fox was, and then I participated in my first ever Terry Fox charity run after I became a landed immigrant in 1992. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So again, who was Terry Fox? Well, he was a Canadian athlete. He was born on July 28th, 1958 in Winnipeg, Manitoba. He and his family moved to British Columbia in 1966, where he eventually developed into a distance runner and a basketball player. He even won the High School of the Year Athlete of the Year award in grade 12 before he graduated from Port Coquitlam High School with distinction. And he then enrolled in Simon Fraser University in Vancouver with the goal of becoming a phys ed teacher. In 1977, though, Terry Fox returned home, complaining of searing pain in his right knee. He was running or training on the track. Well, I didn't know any of this, of course, at the time, but that same year in 1977, I also had a friend by the name of Chris Marshall. And I mention this because Chris ended up having something in common with Terry Fox. I distinctly remember giving Chris a friendly punch in the arm, in his left arm one day in class in Spanish. And he winced. And he said, "Don't hit him," because his arm was sore. That really hurt. And so, of course, being a 15-year-old dork and his friend, I jokingly hit him again, same arm. And then I realized from his reaction just how serious he was about the pain. And so I apologized. Well, back to Terry Fox. His mother then took him to the Royal Columbian Hospital, and x-rays confirmed he had osteogenic sarcoma, a cancerous tumor that makes the bone go soft. Now, despite the unsettling news and his family being in tears, Fox apparently announced, "I'm not ready to leave the world." Now, to stop the spread of cancer, doctors amputated his right leg 6 inches above the knee. And Fox was then fitted with an artificial brace or an artificial leg. And 3 weeks after surgery, he was walking. And soon enough, he was again playing sports with his father. He was still the same competitive person, and he expressed such excitement at having beaten cancer. What he didn't know, of course, was that stray sarcoma cells can end up in the lungs and not show up on the scans until much later. So around the same time, my friend, Chris Marshall, he was also, by the way, a competitive distance runner, like Terry Fox, and he learned that he too had cancer. And much like Terry Fox, then, the doctors had to amputate Chris's left arm, that same one I jokingly punched a month earlier, in January of 1978. Now, Chris eventually did return to school, and he tried to do what he could to carry on life as normally as possible, but the disease spread pretty aggressively to the rest of his body. And he started going to the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, in the US for regular cancer treatments. Now, in the case of Terry Fox, he joined the basketball team of the Canadian Wheelchair Sports Association in July of 77. The head of the program, Rick Hansen, was quite impressed by Fox's energy, and he didn't even know that he was undergoing chemotherapy. So Fox would go on to play in 3 national championship victories with the team. Fox never forgot an article, though, that he'd read the night before his surgery. It was a feature about an amputee, Dick Traum, who'd run the New York City Marathon. At the start of 1979, then, Terry Fox decided to devise his own training schedule. His prosthetist developed a better running leg using a pogo stick with a motorcycle shock in an absorber. And even with the improved artificial leg, though, his stump would be covered in cysts and it would be bleeding after every run. So in August, his friend, Doug Allward, also a runner, took him to a marathon in Prince George. Fox finished last, 10 minutes behind the last 2-legged runner, and the other runners watched, crying and clapping as he crossed the finish line. So that spurred him on to think much bigger. And in the fall of 1979, he launched his plan to raise money for cancer research by running all the way across Canada. Now, again, this is a well-known story. His aim was to raise $1 for every single Canadian, or about $24 million in total, given there were 24 million Canadians at the time. So the Canadian Cancer Society did support his efforts, and they agreed to support him, assuming he could get additional corporate sponsors. And this was absolutely essential to put all the materials together in order to support him during this audacious undertaking. So Fox's plan then was to start in St. John's, Newfoundland, and to finish on the west coast, in Vancouver Island. And so on Saturday morning, April 12th, 1980, Fox dipped his artificial leg into the Atlantic Ocean. And he commenced upon his, what then became known as his Marathon of Hope. So the idea was to run the equivalence of 1 full marathon, that's 26 miles, 42 kilometers roughly. And he stuck to that schedule. And he crossed through Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and into Quebec on June 10th. And on June 23rd, after 73 days of running, Fox would take his first day off. And then on the last day, or the last Saturday in June, Fox entered Ontario at the town of Hawkesbury on the Ottawa River. And the town held this massive welcoming party, the brass band, thousands of balloons, and they made a major contribution. And contributions were flocking in, quite frankly, from all over the country, corporate and personal in nature. In early July, Fox arrived in Ottawa and met the Governor General, Ed Schreier. He enjoyed a standing ovation from the fans at the CFL game between Ottawa and Saskatchewan, kicking the opening ball, symbolically, of course. And on July 4th, Fox met with then Prime Minister, the senior, Pierre Trudeau. As Fox ran then towards Toronto, and specifically Nathan Phillips Square, he was joined by Darryl Sittler. Sittler's the former Toronto Maple Leaf hockey captain. Again, quite well known. Still holds the record for 10 points in a game, by the way. 4 goals and 6 assists. Anyway, a crowd of 10,000 was waiting, and Sittler presented him with his 1980 All-Star NHL sweater. And Sittler remarked to the crowd, quote, "I've been around a lot of athletes a long time, and I've never seen any with his courage and stamina," end quote. So Fox went on to make his way through southern Ontario, hitting the likes of Oakville and Hamilton, London, my current hometown, Kitchener and Guelph. And he also got to meet one of his hockey heroes himself, Bobby Orr, who presented him with a $25,000 check from Planters Peanuts. And Fox said at the time that meeting Orr was the highlight of his trip. So Terry Fox then celebrated his 22nd birthday on July 28th in Gravenhurst. But unfortunately, then things took a turn for the worse. And as he headed toward Georgian Bay, his health changed. He would wake up tired, sometimes asking for time alone, and just sit in his van and cry. Well, in Parry Sound, Bobby Orr's father gave him his son's Canada Cup sweater. So he passed the halfway point of his journey just before Sudbury. And on August 31st, as he approached Thunder Bay, Fox said that he felt like he'd caught a cold. Next day, he started to cough more and more, felt pains in his chest and his neck. He kept running because people were out there cheering him on. And then 18 miles out of the city, he stopped. Fox was taken to a hospital where doctors examined him and explained that his cancer had invaded his lungs. His parents arrived the next day in Thunder Bay, and holding his mother Betty's hand, Fox held a news conference and told reporters he had to go home. So his marathon of hope had lasted 143 days. He'd run more than 3,300 miles, more than 5,300 kilometers. And he said, how many people do something they really believe in at a news conference? I just wish people would realize that anything's possible if you try. Dreams are made if people try, end quote. Now, back to my friend Chris Marshall. So in his case, there was no marathon of hope per se. There was no amazing athletic feat that we're remembering all these years later. In his case, the cancer was just too aggressive, and it spread even more quickly. And so my friend Chris Marshall died on July 11th, 1979, just before the start of our senior year in high school. And of course, before Terry Fox's Marathon of Hope. Such a nice kid, even with his arm amputated. He was still always smiling and making jokes. We would joke around together. But I didn't see him much after his cancer worsened. And my one regret in life is that I didn't visit him in the hospital at the end. But again, I was only 17, and I wasn't really part of the family's inner circle either, so it's probably understandable. I have one more item about Chris at the end of this vlog. As for Terry Fox, well, he wore his Marathon of Hope t-shirt for the first few weeks in hospital. The tumors had spread dramatically. The country rallied around him, though. A fundraiser was broadcast with celebrities like John Denver and Elton John and Anne Murray, several of my favorites. And this broadcast hauled in another $10 million for the Fox Fund, as people all over the country and even different parts of the world were raising money through walkathons and stitchathons and all kinds of different mechanisms. And so as he endured his chemotherapy, Fox would then be given many additional honors, including becoming the youngest companion of the Order of Canada. Canada's sports editors gave him the Lou Marsh Award, the Lou Marsh Trophy, for outstanding athletic achievement that year. And then by the new year 1981, though, his health worsened considerably. The tumors had spread to his abdomen, and still, despite all that was happening, and as his health deteriorated, remarkably, by February of 1981, Fox had raised the $21.1 million that he aimed to raise, equaling Canada's population of 24.1 million people at that time, at least $1 for every Canadian. So looking back then at the run, Fox would reflect, quote, people thought I was going through hell, and maybe I was partly, but still I was doing what I wanted, and a dream was coming true, end quote. And so then with his family by his side, Terry Fox died on June 28, 1981. And that September, the first official Terry Fox run was held in Canada and around the world. More than 300,000 people participated and raised another $3.5 million. So Terry Fox runs now are held annually in dozens of countries, 60 or more. And his legacy lives on with these annual runs, which have now raised over $900 million, or closing in on $1 billion for cancer research. As for my friend Chris Marshall, excuse me, there's no such legacy similar to Terry Fox's, and I'm not sure even how many people might still remember him. But I certainly can name at least one person who remembers him: his father, Freddie Ray Marshall, born August 22nd, 1928. His father lived for a time in an orphanage at age 11 after his mother died, so he and his siblings were sent to an orphanage. Now, the senior Marshall eventually went on to earn his PhD in economics. And Dr. Marshall was mainly an academician until his retirement in 1999, except for the stint that he served as the U.S. Secretary of Labor from 1977 to 81 under President Jimmy Carter. And that's precisely why I got to know Chris, because he moved with his family there, so his dad could be the Secretary of Labor under President Carter. What's also remarkable in this story is that Chris's dad, Dr. Marshall, is still alive as of this taping. He's on schedule to turn 97 this year. He's also the same Ray Marshall that lent his name to the Ray Marshall Center for the Study of Human Resources at the University of Texas, Austin. So if interested, I'll leave a link in the description below. But specifically, I was fascinated to hear Dr. Marshall speak on a podcast just last year, late in 2023, talking about his work and his life, and specifically his work as a labor economist. So just a little interesting footnote. So let's conclude, though, this remembrance of my number one sports hero, though, Terry Fox. And so here's what he publicly read during part of his Marathon of Hope. And it's a poem titled "It Couldn't Be Done" by Edgar Guest. Somebody said that it couldn't be done, but he, with a chuckle, replied that maybe it couldn't, but he would be the one who wouldn't say no till he tried. So he buckled right in with the trace of a grin on his face. If he worried, he'd hit it. He started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. Somebody scoffed, "Oh, you'll never do that. At least no one has ever done it." But he took off his coat and he took off his hat, and the first thing we knew, he'd begun it. With a lift of his chin and a bit of a grin, without any doubting or quit it, he started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. There are thousands to tell you it cannot be done. There are thousands to prophesy failure. There are thousands to point out to you one by one the dangers that await to assail you. But just buckle in with a bit of a grin, just take off your coat and go for it. Just start to sing as you tackle the thing that cannot be done, and you'll do it. So, and that's, I guess, what I love about sports. You know, it's not the winning necessarily, although who doesn't like to win? It's the triumph of the human spirit. So until next time, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and give away hugs in abundance. You know you can do it. That thing that hasn't been done, you can get it done. We'll see you soon.